6 in the morning, Atlanta cemetery. A man in a plain cashmere sweater stands alone before a headstone that costs less than his watch. Wind moves through the oak trees. He does not pray. He speaks quietly to the stone as if finishing a conversation started decades ago. I go see if they're worth our time. 30 blocks north, a 40-story glass tower catches the first light. Peachtree Street, the building where 3 visits have already been made, each one different, each one watched. Inside, a young receptionist adjusts her blazer. A security guard glances at the door. On the mezzanine above, a woman grips the railing with hands that will not let go. Revolving doors turn. The man steps in. The lobby does not shift, and somewhere in the back of his jacket, a phone waits for 3 words that will unmake everything. Terry was quiet at 6 in the morning, not peaceful quiet. Not the kind you seeks out, the kind that sits on your chest without asking. The kind that makes you aware of your own breathing because everything else has stopped. Marcus Webb stood in front of a headstone cost less than his watch. He thought about it every first Monday of the month when he came here, which was every first Monday of the month, rain or board meeting or nothing at all. Stone read, James Webb, 1940-2009. Electrician, father. 11 words, 40 years of work, 40 years of crawling into walls, pulling wire through dark spaces, coming home with burned fingers and a thermos that smelled like coffee and sawdust. What the world gave him in return was 11 words as on a piece of granite. Marcus didn't pray. He'd tried when he was younger. Couldn't make it stick. His father had tried to teach him. Sunday mornings when they both smelled like church clothes and his mother's cooking. Take on Marcus, took on his sister instead. She was the one who carried the faith forward. Marcus carried something else. What he did instead was talk. Not out loud, most days, just the quiet conversation that happens when you stand somewhere long enough and let the thoughts organize themselves into something that resembles a sentence. Today, he said it out loud. Big day, ba. The nickname came automatically, always had, short for nothing. Just something 4-year-old Marcus had called his father because Dad came out sounding like a question, and James Webb was never a question. Always a statement, a fact, a given. Going to see if these people are worth our time. Wind moved through the oak trees at the far end of the cemetery. Long, slow movement, the kind that takes its time because it knows it doesn't need to hurry. Marcus took that as an answer. Or close enough. He straightened his jacket, not a suit jacket, just a plain dark cashmere sweater, clean lines, no logo, nothing announcing itself. He'd chosen it deliberately that morning, standing in front of a closet that contained things worth more than most people's cars, and reaching for the thing that looked like nothing in particular. Driver waited at the iron gate. 3 years on the job, name was Daniel, good man, knew better than to ask how these visits went, or how long it'd take, or what Marcus was thinking when he came back to the car with that particular look on his face. Some rituals you don't interrupt. The car pulled out onto the empty Atlanta street. Monday morning, not yet 7. The city still assembling itself. Traffic lights cycling through their colors for nobody. Marcus sat, seat, and looked out the window and thought about a building he'd visited twice already. Third time was the real one. Third time always told you everything. Here is what most people didn't know about Marcus Webb. Not the Forbes cover people, not the conference panel people who introduced him with 17 seconds of credentials before he'd sat down. Not the journalist who used words like visionary and disruptor and self-made, as if those words explained something. What they didn't know was the rule. One rule, personal, not written anywhere, non-negotiable. Before signing any major partnership, anything worth more than $100 million, and a significant piece of Webb Technology's future, Marcus visited the company 3 times. Same building, different version of himself each time. No advance notice on visit 2 and 3. No entourage, no signals. To catch anyone lying, to see who they actually were when they weren't performing, because companies don't reveal their culture in boardrooms. They reveal it in lobbies. In the 2 seconds, a security guard decides whether to smile or not smile. In the way a receptionist's posture either closes when someone unfamiliar walks through the door. In what the room does, automatically, without thinking, when someone arrives who doesn't match its expectations. His father had taught him that. Not intentionally, just by existing in spaces that hadn't been built with him in mind. James Webb had spent 40 years walking into buildings through service entrances. Side doors, freight elevators, not because any law required it, because nobody in those buildings had ever stopped long enough to ask whether it should be different. And because James Webb, who was the steadiest man Marcus had ever known, had absorbed the instruction without complaint and passed through those doors every morning and done his work and come home, and never once suggested that the arrangement was unjust. That part to Marcus. Marcus had been doing it ever since. The first visit had been on a Tuesday. 9:15 in the morning, Marcus had worn the Brioni suit, the dark charcoal one with the subtle sheen that said, "I know exactly what this costs, and I'm not going to explain it to you." Claudette, his assistant of 11 years, who carried a leather folio and walked half a step behind him with the practiced ease of someone who understood that her job was to be present without being prominent, had taken the Bentley. And when that Bentley pulled to the curb in front of Harwood Systems, the 40-story building on Peachtree Street with the glass facade that caught morning light like an architectural argument for its own importance, Marcus watched with the lobby shift before he reached the door. The doorman straightened. The security guard near the desk pulled himself upright. The receptionist, a young woman with her hair pulled back, late 20, bright eyes behind a practiced expression, stood from her chair. Stood. Gerald Stone, CEO of Harwood Systems, came out of the elevator already smiling, suit pressed, hand extended. The smile of a man who had been working toward this meeting for 6 months and knew what was at stake. "Mr. Webb, welcome to Harwood." Marcus had shaken his hand, taken the tour, sat in the boardroom with the glass walls, and listened to a presentation about market positioning and technological upgrades in a future that Harwood believed it could build if Webb Technologies agreed to build it alongside them. Good questions, received reasonable answers. Gerald Stone, and said he'd be in touch. On the drive back, he'd opened his notebook. Small moleskine, black, half filled with handwriting his assistant once described as readable if you know Marcus and archaeological if you don't. Wrote one line, visit 2. Next week, the second visit was on a Wednesday, alone this time. No Claudette, no folio, no Bentley. Marcus took a taxi to the corner of Peachtree and 7th, walked the half block in dark jeans, a plain blue Oxford shirt, good shoes that were beautiful in the way that expensive things sometimes are when they're trying not to announce themselves. Doorman was looking at his phone, glanced up when Marcus reached the door, back down, didn't move. Marcus pulled the door himself. Inside, the lobby had the same marble floor, the same abstract paintings, the same architectural assertion of its own significance. But the atmosphere, the social temperature of the room, registered differently, not hostile, just different in a way that the first visit hadn't been. Approached the reception desk, the same young woman from last Tuesday. Her nameplate read Renata Sloan, Guest Relations. But she was mid-conversation with a colleague, something that had produced a small laugh she was still finishing when Marcus arrived at the desk. She completed the laugh before she looked up. "Can I help you?" Professional, adequate. The voice you use when you will say the right words in the right order, but nothing behind them costs you anything. "I have a meeting with Gerald Stone. Name? Webb." She typed, looked at the screen with the surface attention of someone going through a motion they've performed thousands of times. "I don't see anything scheduled. It's informal. He's expecting me." A pause, a look that was half professional skepticism, half something else. That Marcus had been reading his entire life and had learned not to react to in real time. "I'll need to call up." Of course. He waited 7 minutes, standing, no offer of a seat, no offer of water. Security guard near the elevator bank monitored him with the casual attention of someone who hadn't yet decided whether action was necessary, but was keeping the option available. Gerald Stone appeared eventually, flustered, full of explanations about scheduling and miscommunication, and his assistant, who apparently hadn't relayed the message properly. Marcus smiled, said it was no problem. On the ride back, he opened the moleskine. 3 words. "One more time." Third visit. This morning, Marcus had walked 6 blocks from where Daniel dropped him at the corner of Peachtree and 7th. Same corner, different man, or the same man different at least dressed, which was the whole point. The cashmere sweater, tailored dark pants, Italian leather shoes that were remarkable only to people who knew what they were looking at, which was not many people and was entirely the intention. No phone visible, no bag, no signal of arrival. He stopped on the sidewalk across the street and watched the building for 3 minutes. A man in a navy suit came through the revolving doors, and the lobby bent toward him before he'd fully entered. That almost imperceptible shift in posture and attention that spaces perform for people they've decided matter. A woman in a red blazer badged through without breaking stride. A delivery driver veered left toward the service elevator with the practiced efficiency of someone who knows exactly which doors are for which people. Marcus watched all of it. Then he crossed the street and walked in. The lobby did not shift. No doorman acknowledgement. No security nod. Renata Sloan was at the desk, tilted slightly behind the surface of it, phone at an angle she thought wasn't visible. She looked up when she registered movement, looked at Marcus. A half-second into inventory. The sign so automatic the person running it doesn't know it's happening. Her posture settled, not the settling of someone who has decided everything is fine. The settling of someone who has decided this doesn't require full attention. Marcus approached. Good morning. Morning. Lightweight. The greeting you give to the lobby rather than to any particular person in it. I have a 9 o'clock with Gerald Stone. She looked up more directly now, not with interest, with patience you deploy when someone is about to make a claim that requires management. Name? Marcus Webb. She typed. This time Marcus watched her fingers with the attention he developed over decades of watching what people do when they think they're only being observed casually. Her fingers moved. Her eyes didn't move the way eyes move when they're actually reading results. She was performing the motion of searching. Not seeing anything under that name. You might want to check the executive calendar directly. The meeting was confirmed Friday. Tightening around her eyes. The tightening of someone who doesn't appreciate being told how to do her job by someone she's already placed in a category that doesn't warrant it. Sir, I've checked. She leaned back slightly. There's nothing. Mr. Stone is expecting me. This concerns the partnership between Harwood and Webb Technologies. Something moved across her face then. Not recognition, or if it was, she pushed it down before it could surface and change anything. What settled instead was something Marcus had encountered in various forms in his entire professional life. Not malice. Something that didn't need to be malice to do the same damage. Amusement, the quiet certainty of someone who has already decided how this ends. She slid a business card across the desk. One smooth motion. The gesture that closes a conversation. Maybe she'd try his office directly. General contacts on there. Marcus didn't take the card. No need for that. If you check Gerald Stone's executive calendar, you'll find my name in the 9 o'clock block. The shift was visible. Her voice changed register. The professional soul surfaced then. Sir, deliberate pause. The delivery entrance is around back. I'm not here to deliver anything. I understand, but I've already explained. I understand you've explained. The voice Marcus had been using in rooms like this for 35 years. The voice that costs him something every time, and that he pays anyway because the alternative is worse. Asking you to look again. A silence opened between them. Around them, the lobby continued its Monday morning choreography. But something in the immediate radius had changed. The security guard, 2 meters away, had stopped pretending he was looking elsewhere. Junior executive by the elevator bank had slowed to a stop. Renata looked at Marcus for a moment, then typed again. Her eyes moved this time, reading something. For 4 seconds, her expression held the specific tension of someone processing information that doesn't fit the decision they've already made. She closed the screen. Like I said, nothing under that name. And she looked back at her phone. That was when the elevator opened and Victor Hale walked out. 52 years old, executive vice president of operations. The kind of man who wore authority the way other men wore a good watch. Constantly, comfortably, aware of its effect without having to think about it. Silver at the temples, shoes with a subtle sheen, a stride that said he was returning from somewhere consequential. He crossed the lobby and saw Marcus immediately. And here is what Marcus registered in the 2 seconds before Victor Hale's face performed its reset. Recognition, not the soft kind. Not have I seen this person before. The hard, immediate recognition of someone who has spent 6 months preparing for a negotiation and has committed the fates of the person across the table to something approaching memory. Victor Hale knew exactly who Marcus Webb was. 1 second, maybe less, than the reset. Smooth, professional. The expression of a man experiencing an ordinary Monday. He approached the desk. Renata straightened automatically, the posture adjustment that happens in the presence of institutional authority. Just handling something, Mr. Hale. Gentleman thinks he has a meeting. Victor looked at Marcus. A long look, something moving behind his eyes that his face declined to show. I see. Small pause. I'm sure the team has it handled. He turned away, and then he said something else. Quietly, directed at the security guard rather than at Renata or Marcus' breath, but not really under his breath. The volume of a comment that can be heard by everyone present and denied by the person who made it. These situations should be resolved at the door. That was all. He walked to the executive elevator, pressed the button. waited with his back to the room, and Marcus stood at the reception desk and listened to what followed that comment. The way the security guard shifted his weight, the way Renata's posture realigned itself, the way the lobby reorganized around a set of instructions that had just been issued without anyone technically issuing them. His badge said T. Kovacs. He was broad-shouldered and doing his job in the way he understood his job, which was not a moral failure of his own. Is that the result of working in a building that had given him a clear picture of who belonged where? Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. I have a confirmed meeting with Gerald Stone. I understand, but without verification, the verification is in the system. I've asked the receptionist to access the executive calendar. Kovacs at Renata. The shorthand of a shared workplace, of a culture. Sir, the hand came up. Grabbing yet, hovering near Marcus's arm in the language that means this can end easily, or it can end another way. Step outside. Marcus looked at the hand, looked at Renata, who had found something on her desk that required attention. Looked at the elevator where Victor Hale stood with his back turned, waiting, perhaps listening. Marcus Webb did what he had taught himself to do in rooms like this, starting from the very first room like this, when he was 23 years old with a business plan and a meeting with investors who kept looking at the plan and then at him as if these two things couldn't belong to the same sentence. Completely still, not resistance, not defiance, just stillness. The stillness of someone who will not let someone else set the temperature of this moment. I'll step outside, he said. I'd like it noted that I have a confirmed appointment, that I've been denied access to verify that appointment, and that this is being handled in a way that doesn't match your company's stated values. Kovacs blinked. That was not the sentence the situation was supposed to generate, but he gestured toward the door. And Marcus walked. He was almost at the revolving door when he heard it. Renata's voice, not loud, pitched for the colleague beside her. Marcus was still within range, and lobbies with high ceilings carry sound in particular ways. Some people just have no idea. Murmur of agreement from the colleague, then a small laugh. Marcus walked through the revolving door, stepped onto Peachtree Street. Morning traffic, morning light, the ordinary city proceeding in all its ordinary directions, entirely unaware. He stood on the sidewalk, adjusted his cuffs, 2 motions, 4 seconds. Not because they needed adjusting, but because the ritual of it gave him something to do with his hands that wasn't the thing his hands wanted to do. He took his phone from his jacket pocket, found the contact labeled Delta, sent 3 words, begin as planned, put the phone away. Started walking. Behind him through the glass, he could see the lobby returning to itself. Renata already re-engaged with something at her desk, the energy of a performance being savored. A small audience gathering, the particular lightness of people who believe the morning has resolved in the right direction. Marcus didn't look back for long. But before he turned away completely, his gaze went up, to the mezzanine level that ran along the interior wall of the lobby. There was a woman standing there, both hands on the railing, not for balance, the grip of someone using the physical object to contain something that would otherwise need somewhere to go. Her eyes were on him, and her face held none of what the lobby held below. No amusement, no discomfort of someone trying to stay uninvolved. What her face held was harder to name. The specific grief of someone who watched a moment they recognized and could not stop. Marcus held her gaze for 2 seconds, then walked. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know what she had seen or what she had documented or what she was going to do. Didn't know she had spent 12 years carrying the name M. Webb in the back of her mind like a fact she couldn't quite place. Just walked, and behind him on the mezzanine, Simone Carter released the railing and stood with her hands at her sides and let herself feel, for exactly a moment, what it cost to watch and do nothing. She turned and walked back to her desk because there was something she needed to open, a folder, 14 months old. There was a new entry to write dated today, before the details got soft around the edges, and after that, she was going to do something she had been building toward without knowing she was building toward it. Yet, but soon, in the Bentley heading back north, Marcus sat with his notebook open on his knee. He didn't write anything for several minutes. He watched Atlanta assemble itself outside the window, the city getting up to speed, finding its weekday rhythm, and he thought about his father. Not with grief exactly, more with the particular awareness that comes from spending time at someone's grave and then walking back into the world they used to inhabit. A heightened attention to surfaces, to who moves through spaces and how and at what cost. What his father had never talked about the service entrances. Once, in all years, Marcus had been old enough to ask. He had simply used them, put on his uniform and picked up his toolbox and gone in through whichever door the building directed him toward and done his work and come home. Marcus had asked him once, when he was maybe 16, whether it bothered him. His father had been quiet for a long time. Long enough that Marcus thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he'd said, "What would it change if it did?" Marcus had carried that question for 42 years, had turned it over in different lights, in different moods, at different moments, in a career that had taken him from a small office with seconds-hand furniture to a company worth $11 billion. He'd arrived at an answer his father might not have recognized, but would, Marcus thought, have understood. What would it change? Everything if you built it right. He opened the notebook, wrote one line at the top of a clean page. Harwood, visit 3, confirmed. Below it, one word, begin. He closed the notebook and let Atlanta go past and thought about everything that was already in motion. Marcus Webb's office had 3 glass walls, not for the view, though the view was considerable. Atlanta cricket spreading south and east from the 34th floor, the kissed Klein doing what skylights do when they catch mid-morning light, making everything below look deliberate, purposeful, as if the city had been arranged rather than accumulated. Glass walls were for a different reason. Marcus had designed the office himself 12 years ago when Webb Technologies moved into this building, and he'd had the opportunity to build a space from scratch. Architect had suggested something more contained, more private, the kind of executive suite that signals importance through enclosure, through the message that what happens inside cannot be seen from outside. Marcus had said no. He wanted to see his company working, wanted to look up from whatever was in front of him and see movement, activity, people doing things that mattered. Too many years in rooms that were sealed against the outside to want that for himself now, so 3 glass walls, one solid one behind his desk where a single framed photograph hung. James Webb, 1987, standing out the building Marcus had recognized the first time he saw the photograph and had not for years understood why. Understand later, much later. Now he sat at his desk and did something he almost never did. Nothing. Reviewing documents, not on the phone, not moving between the 17 threads of decision that ran through any given Monday at a company this size. Sitting, coffee going cold on the right side of the desk, notebook closed, phone face down. Claudette had brought the coffee at 10:15. Set it down and looked at him with the quiet accuracy of someone who has worked closely with a person for 11 years and can read the difference between every variety of his stillness. Without saying anything, good assistant. Marcus looked at the Harwood Systems file on his screen, not the financial projections. Technology assessment, his team had spent 3 months preparing, the notes, his own. Leskin giant pages he'd photographed and uploaded after each visit because he'd learned long ago that the most important observations were the ones that didn't fit into any existing category and therefore needed to be kept somewhere separate from the official record. Visit 1. The Brioni suit, the lobby bending toward him before he'd reached the door. Gerald Stone's hand already extended. Boardroom with the glass walls and the presentation that was technically competent and strategically sound and revealed, underneath both of those things, a company that was running on borrowed time and knew it and was hoping Webb Technologies was the answer to a problem it hadn't fully admitted it had. Visit 2. The blue Oxfordshire shirt. 7 minutes at the reception desk, the security guard's casual surveillance. Gerald walking past without stopping, without looking, without the neural alarm that should have fired when the man you've been preparing to meet for 6 months is standing 12 feet away. Visit 3 this morning. Renata Sloan and the business cards slid across the desk, Kovacs in his hovering hand. Victor Hale stepping off the elevator and running a reset so smooth it would have convinced most people. Not Marcus. Marcus had been watching people perform resets since he was in his 20s. You learned to see the moment before the performance began, the fraction of a second when the real response surfaced before the managed one covered it. Fraction was the truth. Everything after it was editing. Victor Hale's fraction had lasted long enough. He looked at the Delta notification on his screen. His team had acknowledged receipt at 9:17. 2 minutes after, he'd sent message from the soft sidewalk outside Harwood. They were good. Been prepared for this outcome because Marcus had prepared them for both outcomes, and the contingency for this one had been ready for 2 weeks. Told them which outcome to expect. He genuinely hadn't known. 3 weeks ago, after visit 1, the probability of signing with Harwood had been around 70%. Visit 260. After this morning, 0. Not because Renata Sloan had been rude to him. One person's behavior in one moment wasn't a company. He'd understood that since he was old enough to understand anything about how institutions worked. 0. Because of the accumulation. Because of the 7 minutes at the desk and the security guard's gaze, and Gerald walking past, and Victor Hale's fraction of a second, and the comment delivered at the volume of something that could be heard and denied simultaneously. 0 because of what all of it, together, told him about the building's nervous system, about what the company did automatically without instructions when the X signals changed. A company's culture wasn't its worst actor. It's what everyone else did when the worst actor moved. He'd seen what everyone did. Phone lit up with the first market notification at 10:47. Harwood Systems, down 1%. He turned the phone face down again. 1% was nothing. Market noise, Monday jitters, had nothing to do with him or with Delta or with any of the 17 quiet movements his team had put in motion between 17 and now. But it was a beginning, and beginnings mattered. They were the only part of a soul sequence you could point to afterward and say, there. That's where it started. That's the moment everything after became possible. He pulled the notebook toward him, opened it to the page that said begin. With it for a moment, then turned to a fresh page and started writing. Not strategy, not next steps. Just writing the way he sometimes wrote when he needed to process something through his hands rather than his head. His father had done it differently. James Webb had processed things through physical work, through the act of fixing something that was broken and seeing it work again. Marcus had inherited the need, but not the method. He'd found his own version of it in notebooks. In the act of what was wet inside into marks on a page that didn't ask anything back. He wrote about this morning, about standing on the sidewalk adjusting his cuffs, about the woman on the mezzanine who had held the railing and held his gaze, and done both with the intensity of someone trying to communicate something she couldn't say out loud. He didn't know her name. He wrote it anyway. Mezzanine. So something. Find out who. Then he closed the notebook, picked up his phone, and called his head of research. Simone Carter's office was not much of an office. Been described to her when she took the position 4 years ago as a transitional space, meaning it was the space available when she arrived and had become permanent through the inertia of nobody caring enough to move her somewhere better. Was on this mezzanine level, which sounded interesting until you understood that mezzanine meant the architectural afterthought between the lobby and the real floors, the level that existed because the building's original designers had needed somewhere to put the mechanical infrastructure and had added a partial floor around it as an afterthought. Her window looked down into the lobby. This had seemed like a flaw when she moved in. 4 years later, she understood it differently. You learn things from a window like that. About a building's nervous system, about what happened in the lobby when the people who ran the building weren't watching the lobby, because they were up floors where the important work happened. She'd been watching this morning when Marcus Webb walked in. She'd recognized him before he reached the reception desk. Not from the Forbes cover, though that had been recent enough that his face was still fresh in the public record. She'd recognized him from something older, something she hadn't thought about in years, but that surfaced. You see, she saw his face. The way search surfaces, not because you've called them, but because the world has handed you the specific key that opens them. 12 years ago, she had been 29 years old, 3 years into a doctoral program that had nearly broken her twice, and that she had refused to let break her a third time, because the third time would have been the last one, and she had known it. Dissertation was on adaptive neural security protocols, a framework for cybersecurity systems that could learn from attack patterns in real time and recalibrate their defenses without human intervention. Was she believed then, and still believed now, 12 years and 3 industry revolutions later, genuinely ahead of what anyone else was doing at the time. The committee had not agreed. 7 of the 8 panel members had delivered their skepticism in the careful language of academic objection, concerns about scalability, questions about methodology, doubts about real-world application. The language was technical. The objection underneath it was not. She had understood that, had understood it in the specific way that people understand things they cannot prove and cannot say, and must therefore simply carry. Vote 6-2 against. Significant revision required. The minority report, submitted by the 2 dissenting voices, arguing that the work was not only sound but important, had been signed by a Professor Eleanor Vance, whose support Simone had worked 3 years to earn, and by one other name. Webb, independent technical observer, Webb Technologies. She hadn't known he was going to be in the room, hadn't known he'd been invited, known anything about him except that name on a minority report that, without his vote alongside Zance's, would have been a single dissent instead of a documented 2-to-1 split that gave the committee's decision a different character in the official record. She'd sent an email to Webb Technologies 2 weeks after, a professional thank you, formally worded, asking for nothing, no response. She'd assumed it had dissolved into a general inbox somewhere, had moved on, had revised the dissertation, published it, taken the Harwood position because it paid reasonably and offered resources she needed for the research she was still quietly building on the foundation of that dissertation. She had not stopped thinking about the work. She had stopped expecting anyone at Harwood to notice it. And then this morning she had looked down through her window and seen Webb standing at Renata Sloane's desk. She had known what was happening before it finished happening, had understood in the first 30 seconds what Renata was doing and what it would cost, had felt the specific nausea of watching a preventable thing proceed toward its conclusion while she stood at a window with her hands on the railing and did the calculation. One sentence, that's all it would have taken. Renata, this is Marcus Webb of Webb Technologies. He's here for a 9 o'clock with Gerald. Calculation had taken less than 10 seconds, which was the most shameful part. It hadn't been a hard calculation. Been fast and clear, and arrived at a conclusion she could defend to herself with reasonable precision. She had a directorship view in Q1. Committee that made that decision included 2 people who had made it clear in the indirect language of institutional politics that they valued her stability, her consistency, her absence from situations that generated friction. One sentence could be the sentence that defined her as a problem. Difficult, as someone who made the executives uncomfortable by pointing out what they didn't want to see. 10 seconds. And Marcus Webb was at the revolving door. She had told herself in the elevator back up to her floor that she would do something. She wasn't done. That the calculation she'd made was a tactical decision, not a moral surrender. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop and found the folder she'd created 14 months ago. Search notes, ongoing, inside, every incident, dated, sourced, described with preclinical inches that she understood at the beginning that this folder would only matter if it was the kind of thing that couldn't be dismissed as subjective, as sensitive, as the perception of someone who was looking for problems rather than finding them. Every meeting she hadn't been included in where her work had been discussed. Every performance review that praised her output and questioned her presence. Every idea that had traveled from her mouth to someone else's presentation. Every corridor conversation that ended a beat too quickly when she rounded the corner. 14 months of pattern, not grievance, pattern. She opened a new entry, today's date, wrote it the way she wrote everything in this folder clinical, sourced, specific. W arrived unescorted, business casual, 9:02 a.m. RS declined to verify calendar, redirected to service entrance, security engaged. Other televider at 9:06 identified subject declined to intervene. VH directed comment to security consistent with behavioral pattern documented March 4, July 17, September 22. She closed the entry, sat back, looked at the lobby through her window. Renata had an audience now. 3 colleagues gathered at the desk. The energy of a story being told by someone who believes they've come out ahead. Samson looked at them for a long moment. She opened a new document, clean page, not in the folder, separate. At the top she typed, for the attention of the Harwood Systems Board of Directors. And she began to write, not a complaint, not an HR filing, not the kind of document that gets routed to a committee and sat on for 6 months, while everyone involved continues doing what they were doing. A presentation, organized, evidence-based, structured the way her dissertation had been structured, the way any argument is structured when you want it to be unanswerable. 14 months of documentation converted into a form that didn't ask anyone to feel anything, just to look, just to read what the data, accumulated carefully over more than a year, actually said about this building and the culture inside it. She wrote for 47 minutes. Her phone rang twice during that time. She didn't answer. Her email that produced notifications she didn't open. The lobby below cycled through its Monday morning business. She finished at 12:43. He read it once from the beginning, made 3 small edits. Opened her email, addressed it to Gerald Stone, CEO, Ellen Marsh, Head of Legal, Raymond Cole, Head of Human Resources. Subject line, Harwood Systems, Cultural Pattern Analysis. For your immediate review. She moved her finger over the trackpad, held it there for 3 seconds. Hesitation. She was past hesitation, something closer to acknowledgement. The recognition that pressing this key would change things in ways she could predict and in ways she couldn't, and that she was doing it anyway, and that this was the correct decision, regardless of what it cost. Pressed send. Then she opened her desk drawer, took out a small cardboard box she'd brought from home a week ago, in the unconscious way that people sometimes prepare for decisions they haven't made yet. Put in the things that mattered. Her mother's photograph, the small succulent she'd been keeping alive for 3 years. Her original dissertation with the coffee stain on the cover she'd never managed to care about removing. She left the awards, the Harwood recognition plaques, the framed commendations for projects whose outcomes she'd built, whose credit had been distributed in ways that were creative with the truth. Closed the box, stood up, looked at the Harwood logo on the wall, walked to the elevator. Her phone buzzed as the elevator doors opened, an unknown number, Atlanta area code. She answered it in the elevator on her way down Carter. The voice was measured. Kind of measured that comes from practice, from years of choosing words in rooms where the wrong word could redirect everything. My name is Marcus Webb. I believe you were watching from the mezzanine this morning. The elevator doors opened into the parking level. Out, let the doors close behind her. Stood in the concrete quiet, Mr. Webb. Her voice was steady. She'd learned steady a long time ago. I owe you an apology. You don't. Quiet, but definite. No performance in it. You made a calculation. I've been making the same one since I was your age. It's not always wrong. A pause in which something rearranged itself in her chest. How did you get my number? I research the people in any company I consider working with. Your work on adaptive security protocols is the most genuinely interesting thing to come out of Harwood Systems in the past 3 years. Pause. Dr. Vance sends her regards. She's been on my advisory board for 2 years. Simone closed her eyes. Professor Eleanor Vance, Georgia Tech. The Narity Report. The 2 names beside Refi in the official record of a committee decision that had tried and failed to end something it didn't understand. You read the dissertation, she said, more than once. You voted for the work when 6 people voted against it. The work was right. The committee was wrong. No elaboration. Just the fact. I tried to reach you afterward. Email I sent to your university address bounced. You'd already graduated by the time my office sent it. Tracked a forwarding address, but it came back undeliverable. I let it go. That was a mistake on my part. Simone opened her eyes, looked at the concrete ceiling of the parking level. He had tried to reach her. 12 years. She had carried the name M. Webb as a footnote to a painful chapter, as the single anonymous act of professional generosity in a room that had been otherwise unkind. Not imagined a person behind it who had also been looking. I'd like to meet, Marcus said. Not here. Not at Harwood. A pause that held something specific in it. Something that wasn't quite a question, but wasn't quite a statement either. Whatever happens next at this company, I don't think it's the right place for the conversation I want to have. She thought about the email she'd just sent, about the box of personal items in her hand, about the directorship that was no longer a calculation she needed to make. When, she said. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, Clifton Hotel, restaurant level. I'll be there. She ended the call. Stood in the parking level for a moment longer. Then she walked to her car, put the box in the trunk, and drove out into a Monday outcomes in the space of a few hours, something entirely different from what it had started as. Gerald Stone watched the Week 2 footage at 2:20. He'd requested it after the 9th unanswered call to Marcus Webb's office. After reading the withdrawal email 4 more times hoping the words would rearrange. After Laura knocked with the expression she wore for news she wished she weren't delivering. The file opens in his screen. He watched alone. Door closed. Timestamp. Wednesday 10 and 3 a.m. A man in a blue Oxford shirt came through the front entrance. Gerald noticed the movement first, the quality of someone who has learned to exist in rooms not designed for him and has decided patience is the most useful tool available. He watched the man at Renata's desk, watched the minutes accumulate, watched composure being maintained because composure was the only thing fully under control. Gerald appeared in the frame, coming from the parking elevators, moving toward the main bank, head angled, the walk of a man whose thoughts are somewhere ahead of him. Within 4 meters of the man at the reception desk and kept walking. Gerald watched himself keep walking. With what that showed him, not cruelty, he could have accounted for cruelty. What the footage showed had no villain, which was somehow worse. Brain, running its automatic assessments of a lobby it had moved through for 12 years, had looked at a person waiting at the desk and had not flagged it. Had sorted the visual information, man in casual clothes, no markers the lobby had taught him to read as significant, into a category filed automatically as not relevant. Had looked at Marcus Webb, looked through him, gone upstairs to attend to things that mattered. Gerald sat with that for a long time. About a question Marcus had asked on the phone 3 days earlier. Gerald, have you watched the security footage from the past 3 weeks? He'd answered yes automatically, the way executives answer questions that feel like they have obvious answers. Yes closes it without cost. Marcus had known he was lying, or rather had known he was doing what people in his position do with things that haven't risen to their direct attention. The question wasn't about surveillance. It was a diagnostic, an invitation to look at something, to understand what he was seeing. Gerald had failed it. He looked at the stock ticker, -7%, still moving. His assistant knocked. He opened the tablet she brought. An email from Simone Carter, 14 pages, organized, sourced. The quality of something built patiently over a long time by someone who understood that evidence matters more than feeling. Twice. Set it down. Looked at the ceiling for 3 minutes. He had known Simone Carter's name. Seen it in reviews marked above expectations, had noted somewhere in the executive awareness that tracks things without examining them that her output was consistently strong while her internal profile stayed low. He read this as professional preference, someone who liked the work more than the visibility. He had not understood what he was actually looking at. Until now, he confirmed the board meeting, called Marcus once more, voicemail, left a message this time, short, said he'd watched the week 2 footage. Said he understood why Marcus had asked. Said he'd be available when Marcus was ready. He looked out the window at the Atlanta afternoon he'd looked at from this office for 12 years. -9.3%. He went to the board meeting. The board meeting started at 4 and the room broke at 4:11. Was when Patricia Holden, who had chaired this board through a recession and 2 nieces with hostile acquisition, and was not a person who showed alarm in her face, looked up from her screen and said, with the evenness of someone reporting a weather condition rather than a catastrophe, "Has everyone read the email from Simone Carter?" The room had not. Gerald had forwarded it to the board at 3:48, 12 minutes before the meeting started, which was not enough time for anyone to do more than open it. Patricia connected her laptop to the conference screen. The document appeared. 14 pages, clean formatting, evidence organized into sections with dates, and cross-references, and a quality of careful accumulation that made it look less like a complaint and more like a case file. Nobody spoke while they read it. When the last person looked up, the silence continued for another moment, the silence of people individually calculating what this meant and whether any of those calculations could remain private. "Did anyone know about this?" Tricia asked. Around the table, a specific kind of silence, not ignorance. The silence of people who had known something was there without having looked directly at it. Victor Hale, Patricia said. Victor was in the room. Had been since 3:58. He sat 3 chairs down from Gerald with the composed expression of a man who had thought through multiple versions of this meeting and had prepared responses for the most likely ones. "Here," he said. Patricia looked at him. "Simone Carter's document references a comment you made to building security on Monday morning. She has it quoted directly and notes she wrote it down within 10 minutes. I'd need to see the specific quote." Tricia read it aloud. The room received it quietly, the silence of people who have just heard something said out loud that can't be unsaid. "It's taken out of context," Victor said. Gerald Stone looked at him, not with anger. With something quieter and more final, the expression of a man who had spent the past 2 hours watching footage of himself, walked past his most important potential partner, and had arrived at this round with a very clear understanding of what he was no longer willing to participate in. Gerald's voice was level. "Did you know it was Marcus Webb this morning?" "Gerald, I need you to answer that." Pause was 1 second too long. In a room of people trained to read pauses, 1 second is a confession. "I wasn't certain. I've pulled your calendar," Gerald said. "You had a full dossier review on Marcus Webb 2 weeks ago. Photograph was on page 1 of the briefing materials resolution." Gerald paused. "Did you know?" Not a question anymore. Door being opened and held. Victor Hale looked at the table, at his hands on the table, at some point past both of them. He said, 1 word. The room exhaled. Patricia Holden looked at her notes, then at Victor, and the comment to security. "I'm going to stop you there," Patricia said, not unkindly, just with finality. "Ellen, what's our process?" Head of legal was already typing. "Immediate suspension pending investigation. Full access revocation. We'll need his devices before he leaves the building." Started to speak. Patricia raised one hand, a small gesture, the kind that doesn't need to be large, because the authority behind it is not in question. Please step outside with Ellen, he went. After the door closed, the room breathed differently. Gerald looked at the conference screen, which still showed Simone Carter's document. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the stock ticker in the corner of the room's display panel. -12, 3%, still falling. Gerald, Patricia said. Tell me about web technologies. Tell me what we've actually lost here. Gerald told her, all of it, the partnership structure, the technology integration, what Harwood's platform looked like with Webb's neural algorithms versus without them. What the competitive landscape looked like in 6 months if this deal didn't close and Prism Tech, the only other company with comparable technology, went elsewhere. When he finished, Patricia sat with it for a moment. Is there a path back? Gerald thought about a video. A man in a blue shirt and the 4 meters between them. I don't know, he said honestly, but I owe him a call. To negotiate, just because I owe him the call. Patricia nodded. Make it. Gerald called at 6:45. Marcus had been in the Bentley for 20 minutes, heading back toward his building after a late afternoon of meetings that had proceeded with the clean efficiency of the things that had been planned and were executing as planned. Delta had moved through 3 of its 7 phases. His legal team had confirmed receipt of necessary documentation. Donovan Marsh at Prism Tech had sent 2 messages, both of which said essentially, ready when you are. The phone rang. The Murber, Gerald Stone direct line. Marcus looked at it for 1 ring, picked up. Gerald had prepared something to say. Been assembling it since 2:45, when he'd called the first time and gotten voicemail. A version of an apology that was also an explanation, that was also a request for reconsideration. Kind of statement you architect carefully when you know you're going to get chance and you need it to do multiple things at once. What came out instead was simpler and more honest and therefore more useful. Marcus, I watched the week 2 footage. Silence. I walked past you. Gerald's voice was steady in the way that voices become steady when the person using them has moved past pretense into something more exposed. I didn't recognize you. But that's not calling. To explain that way, I'm calling because I think you knew I hadn't watched it. That's why you asked. A pause from Marcus. You wanted me to see myself in it, Gerald said. Just Renata, not just the security guard. Me, yes, Marcus's voice even. Not cold. You were there, Gerald. Not in the moment this morning. You were in a different part of the building. But you were there in a different way. In the footage from last week, you walked through your own lobby and you looked past a person who was waiting at your reception's desk, and you made a decision automatically about whether that person warranted your attention. Gerald was quiet. I'm not telling you this to be cruel, Marcus said. I'm telling you because you asked me to. And because you're one of the few people I've spoken to today, have actually trying to understand what happened instead of managing the story about it. What did happen? Gerald said. From where you were standing, the car moved through Atlanta evening traffic, quiet and unhurried. From where I was standing, Marcus said, I saw the building that told me exactly who it was when it thought no one important was watching. A receptionist who was doing what her environment had trained her to do. A security guard doing the same. An executive vice president whom made a deliberate choice for reasons that had nothing to do with the culture and everything to do with his own positioning. Pause. And a CEO who walked past his own lobby on an ordinary Wednesday and looked at a person waiting at his reception desk, and his brain didn't flag it as something worth stopping for. Gerald didn't answer immediately. I'm not the villain of this story, Marcus said. I want to be clear about that. Bad person, Gerald. You ran a company whose culture taught everyone in it, including you, to perform certain assessments automatically. To sort people by visible signals and allocate attention accordingly. You didn't design that culture initially, but you let it grow. Now it's cost us everything. It's cost you Harwood, Marcus said. That's not everything. It's one company. For the people who work there, I know. A pause. I know what it means for the people who work there. It's not nothing. Another pause. But the culture would have cost them eventually anyway. Companies built on that foundation don't survive long term. Not because the market punishes bias, it often doesn't, but because the people who could have made the company genuinely excellent leave, or never arrive, and are given the room they need. Gerald sat with that. Is there anything? He started. No, Marcus said, not harshly, definitively. The partnership is closed, that decision is final, and I made it for reasons that don't change. Pause. But Gerald, the footage from week 2, the fact that you watched it and understood what you were seeing. Hold on to that. It's worth more than the deal. Gerald didn't know what to say to that. Good night, Gerald. The call ended. Gerald set the phone on his desk, sat back. His office held the particular quiet of a space that knows its own chapter is ending. The framed photographs on the wall, the view south toward the sprawl of Atlanta beyond the window. 20 years of a career that had produced something real and something flawed and something that was now in the process of becoming a cautionary's example in business school classrooms. He looked at the view for a long time. Then he opened his email, found his resignation template, the one his lawyer had drafted for him 2 years ago. Standards executive departure. Intended for a hypothetical he'd hoped would remain hypothetical. He filled in the date, didn't send it yet, but he filled it in because he knew what the morning would bring, what Patricia and the board would have to conclude, and he wanted to be the one who moved first for whatever small amount of integrity that restored. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would send it tomorrow. Across the city, Marcus Webb's Bentley pulled into the garage below his building. For a moment before getting out, the notebook was in his jacket pocket. He'd written nothing new in it since this morning. It out, open to the page that said begin. Below it added 3 words, Phase 1, complete, put it away. Out of the car and rode the elevator up to his office to attend to the 17 things that were waiting, and the 3 things that could wait until tomorrow, and 1 thing that he would do first thing in the morning, regardless of what else was on the calendar. Clifton Hotel, 8 o'clock. A conversation that was 12 years overdue. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, not email. Not a message through legal channels, an actual letter, handwritten, posted with a stamp, addressed to Marcus Webb, Webb Technologies, in handwriting that had quote something of some written slowly and rewritten until the pressure of the pen was almost right, but not quite. No return address. Claudette set it on his desk that morning with a look that communicated, unusual, already checked, clean, interpretation yours. Marcus left it on the corner of his desk through the morning, the Prism Tech review, the Hale case calls, plus the conversation with Donovan Marsh about the Web Center Perfect renovation timeline. 7 in the evening, when the office had emptied and Atlanta was holding its spring light a little longer than it needed to, he picked it up. 2 pages, leaned paper, blue ink. He read it once quickly, set it down, looked out the window, then read it again slowly, the way you read something when you want to understand not just what it says, but what it cost. Renata Sloan. She began by saying she was not writing because of the legal process. The notice of intent had arrived 6 weeks after Monday. The settlement, a public apology and community service, no financial penalties, had been finalized 3 weeks after the notice. Whatever she was writing about now, 13 months later, had nothing to do with any of that. Those chapters were closed. She was working night shifts at a customer service center, 11 to 7, taking calls from people angry about things that weren't the actual things they were angry about. She wrote, I used to be good at sounding like I was listening. I was actually doing it. I thought professional meant efficient, meant moving the line. I'm not good at that anymore. I can't make myself not hear people now, and I'm still figuring out whether that's a problem or the opposite of one. She wrote about a food bank, a man who came in every Saturday, older. The particular dignity of someone who had decided dignity was the thing he'd keep regardless of what else he lost. She'd watched him for 3 weeks. On the 4th week, she was the one handing out bags, and he had to look at her to take his. Something in his eyes stopped her. Not sadness, just presence. The presence of someone entirely there, asking for nothing except to be seen as exactly what he was. She wrote, I watched him walk out, and I thought about how many times a day that happens, someone holding their dignity carefully because they know how easily it gets taken. And someone on the other side, me, before, not even registering that there's something being held, not because I hated him. Because I hadn't learned yet to look. This paragraph was short. I'm not writing because I think this changes what I did. It doesn't. I'm writing because you changed something in me without trying to, and I thought you should know that in case it matters to you. To me, Renata. Marcus set the letter down. He didn't need composing, but something happened in his chest without a clean name. Triumph. He'd never needed her demolished. Not forgiveness in the transactional sense. Something closer to recognition. The recognition of something he hadn't known he was waiting for. Planned 17 steps across 13 months, had resourced and executed each one. He had not planned for lined paper and blue ink arriving on a Tuesday. Some things don't fit in plans. He took out the small notebook, not the Moleskine, the other one, the one his doctor had told him to start 2 years ago for the things that didn't belong in strategy documents. For 20 minutes, closed it, then took out plain paper and a pen, Wrote back 3 paragraphs, his handwriting legible if you knew him. He wrote about his father briefly, not as biography, as the reason underneath everything. He wrote about her question, where she'd gone wrong, not legally, but as a person. Answer isn't in one Monday morning. It's in all the mornings before it. The way we learn to see isn't a decision we make. Habit the world builds quietly, through years of showing us which people get treated as worth attending to and which ones don't. You learned what your environment taught you. That's not an excuse, but it's where the truth starts. You're not learning to be a different kind of person. You're learning to override instructions. Most people never notice they're running. That's not a small thing. And last, I'm not in the business of forgiveness, Ms. Sloan. That's an accounting between you and yourself. But I'm in the business of building things that work better than the things they replaced. Door is open if you decide you want to be part of that. It's the front door, the only kind we have. Marcus Webb, he folded it. Envelope, renotted on the front, just the first name. The formality of a last name would have been wrong for what was inside. Box. Claudette would handle the rest in the morning. He looked at the photograph on the solid wall. James Webb, 1987. Toolbox. The expression of a man entirely present in the moment he's in. Tomorrow, he turned off the lamp and went home. Harwood Systems filed for Chapter 11 on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks and 2 days after a Monday, in which a man in a cashmere sweater had been redirected to a service entrance. The filing was quiet. That was the thing about corporate endings, that most people who hadn't witnessed one up close didn't understand. They were bureaucratic. It happened in language, in filings and motions and court dates. The building on Peachtree Street still stood. The lights still came on in the morning. The elevator still ran between floors, but the thing that had animated it, the shared forward motion of people who believed they were building something, was gone. Been gone for weeks. What remained was the administration of ending. Gerald Stone had submitted his resignation on a Tuesday morning, 4 weeks before FOCA filing, which was before the board had formally requested it. Patricia Holden had accepted it the same day, with a brief private acknowledgement that it was the right move and that she respected the timing. He'd cleaned out his office on a Friday, took the family photograph, left the awards and the commendations and the framed articles from better years. Paused at the door of his office, the corner office on the 40th floor, 20 years of mornings, the view south toward the Atlanta sprawl, and had looked at it long enough to finish whatever internal accounting he was doing. He'd walked out, down the elevator, through the lobby, past Renata's old desk, already occupied by someone else on a rotating shift schedule. Through the front door. He'd sat in his car in the parking garage for 11 minutes before driving north. He had not, in those 11 minutes, looked in the rearview mirror. Hale had been arraigned on his Wednesday. Federal courthouse downtown. Securities fraud, wire fraud, misappropriation of trade secrets. His attorney entered a not guilty plea confident with someone who hadn't yet spent sufficient time with the evidence. Confidence would not survive contact with Helena Marsh's case file, which documented 8 months of deliberate corporate sabotage with the thoroughness of people who had been trained specifically to find things that other people were certain couldn't be found. 4 Wi-Fi connections. That was the technical error. Victor had been careful about the company network, about his work devices, about everything a standard audit would examine. But he had used his personal phone on the company Wi-Fi 4 times across 8 months. 4 moments when the habit of convenience had overridden the discipline of concealment. Webb Technologies' cybersecurity team had found those 4 connections in 6 hours. He stood in the federal courthouse in a suit that had cost $4,000. The room was unimpressed by the suit. He thought about a lobby, about a fraction of a second in which recognition had surfaced before the managed response covered it. A calculation that as if sound in January and had turned out to be built on a fundamental misunderstanding of who he was dealing with. The auction for the Harwood building was held on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the filing. A spare room in a law office downtown, nothing like the dramatic proceedings that movie courtroom suggested. Chairs, a moderator, a small number of bidders, and a lot of paperwork moving between tables. Marcus bid 12% over the floor price. His real estate team had sent him 3 separate analyses recommending patience. The building would drop further, they said. Standard, distressed, asset progression. Waiting another 3 weeks could save several $1 million. They were not wrong. They were running the correct calculation. Marcus thanked them for the analyses and bid 12% over the floor. Nobody in the room understood why. Claudette, sitting beside him, did not ask. She understood that the 12% was not imprecision or impatience. It was a different kind of precision, the precision of someone paying for what a thing means, not only for what it costs. He signed the documents at 11:14. The building on Peachtree Street changed ownership in the time it took a pen to cross a page. Renata Sloan was at her day job when the auction happened. She'd taken on additional hours at the call center while also keeping the Saturday food bank volunteering, which meant her weeks were long and her apartment was quieter than it used to be. And she'd stopped checking certain social media platforms because the effort of managing what she found there was not energy she had left to spend. She'd heard about the auction through the news, had seen Marcus Webb's name attached to the building, but that information for a while, with the image of the building changing hands, of the name above the door eventually changing, of the space where she had spent 4 years of her professional life becoming something different under the direction of the man she had pointed toward a service entrance. She hadn't known yet what she was going to do with the feeling that produced. She'd written the letter the following week, after the Saturday at the food bank, after the man with the paper bag and the careful dignity and the eyes that stopped her mid-motion. Some things take the right moment to become writable. Simone arrived at 7:53, always early, coffee ordered, notebook open. Particular clarity of someone who has made an irreversible decision and found the air on the other side of it lighter than expected. She'd resigned from Harwood yesterday afternoon. Resignation first, then the board email, in that order, deliberately. She wanted to be sure she was sending the documentation because it was right, not because she needed the protection. Had been deactivated by 5. Marcus arrived at 8 exactly. He'd walked from his building 3 blocks away. No Bentley, no driver holding a door. Across from her, coffee appeared without him ordering it. "Good morning." "Good morning." It's a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. "You resigned before you sent the email," he said. "Yes. Why does the order matter?" "Because the email was about the company." "Not my exit. I didn't want them confused. Not by anyone else and not by myself," he nodded. The nod of someone who has understood and doesn't need to say so. "Before you say what you came to say," Simone said, "I need to tell you something." "All right. That morning." 45 seconds. Once in sentence. "I knew who you were the moment I saw you, and I chose not to speak because the cost looked too high." Pause. "I was wrong about the cost, but I made that choice with full information. I own it." Marcus looked at her, not with judgment, with the expression of someone hearing honest moral complexity and finding it more useful than the cleaned-up version. "Minority Report," he said. 2012. "George Tech asps." "Yes, Eleanor Vance called me the night before. The original observer had a family emergency. I was in Birmingham. I read your dissertation on the flight down." A pause. 2 hours. Finished it in the taxi. Simone sat with that. "You read the whole thing in 2 hours. It's not difficult if you have the background. Your framework was clear. The committee's objections were not about your methodology. I knew that. The vote wasn't about your work. No softness, no heat. Just a fact that deserved naming. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters that someone who was in the room says it." She let it land. "I tried to reach you afterward," he said. "Your university email bounced. The forwarding address came back undeliverable. I let it go when I shouldn't have. You tried it all. Eleanor is on my advisory board. She's been advocating for this conversation for close to a year." He held her gaze. "But what's on this table this morning is because I read your dissertation 4 times over 12 years and came to my own conclusion." Eleanor pointed. "I'd already been looking." Simone looked at him steadily. "Tell me what you're proposing," she said. He turned the notebook toward her. Sketch, handwritten notes in the margins. He told her about the building, the lower floors, education center, cybersecurity, AI literacy, technology fundamentals, 4 HBCUs already confirmed. Per floors, incubator space, minority-led startup, 60%, subsidized for 2 years, full WIB Technologies resources and network, executive director. Full authority, budget control, hiring, direction, not a figurehead, the person who actually built it. "I need someone who understands the technical architecture and the human architecture," he said. "Someone who has watched what institutions do to people inside them and has thought carefully about what building something different would actually require." Pause. "Someone who knows what it costs to stay silent and what it costs not to." Simone looked at the sketch. "Marcus, deliberate. Is this because of Monday? Is this what that response looks like? You take the building and put someone like me in charge." He didn't reach for reassurance. She appreciated that partly, he said. Monday accelerated a decision I was already moving toward. I'd needed someone for this role for 6 months. What you did yesterday, walking into that boardroom with 14 months of evidence, is not separate from what I need here. It's the same quality. I won't be a symbol, she said. I won't be the hire that demonstrates accountability after an incident. Don't need a symbol. I need the person who built a recalibration framework. 3 of my engineers have been trying to reverse engineer for 4 years. He held her gaze. Your identity is part of who you are. Your work is why you're at this table. Outside, Atlanta was fully awake. People moving through their Tuesday, the ordinary motion of a city. Simone looked at the name at the top of the sketch. The James Webb Center for Innovation. Tell me about your father, she said. He told her the actual version, not the one for journalists. James Webb, 40 years, side entrances, freight elevators. A man who absorbed the instruction without complaint and never once suggested, in all the years Marcus could remember, that the arrangement was unjust. Passed the awareness of it sideways to his son through everything he didn't say. When he finished, Simone was quiet. He worked in that building, she said. I found out 3 weeks after the auction, records my aunt had kept. 1987 to 1994, service entrance on the side street. A pause. I didn't know when I bought it. She sat with the full weight of that. A man entering a building through its side door for 7 years. His son buying it decades later. Not knowing, not planning. Just following the logic of consequence and purpose until the past and the present arrived at the same address. She said. He extended his hand. She took it. 14 months after a Monday in Atlanta. The lobby was unrecognizable. Not in the way of spaces that have been aggressively redesigned. In the way of a space where someone thought carefully about what it should feel like to walk through the door. Warm wood where cold marble had been. Natural light from repositioned windows. A circular welcome area, open staffed by 2 people trained in the specific art of actually seeing whoever came in. Desk configured as a barrier, no surface that communicated screening before greeting. On the wall opposite the entrance, floor to ceiling, James Webb, 1987. Work uniform, toolbox. Standing outside this building, the building that now bore his name that he had entered through a side door for 7 years, rebuilt by his son into something he could have walked into from some front of the architecture suggesting, before he'd taken 2 steps, that he was in the wrong place. Marcus arrived at 6:45, walked from the hotel 2 blocks away. He stood in the pre-opening quiet and looked at his father's photograph for a long time. James Webb had been 46 in that photograph. The same age Marcus was when Webb Technologies crossed its first billion. 46. His father carrying a toolbox through a side entrance. During the same years, his son was 30 blocks north arguing with investors who couldn't make a business plan, and the man presenting it fit together into something they'd fund. 2 Webb, same city, same years, different doors. Tomorrow became today, Marcus said. He adjusted his jacket, turned toward the entrance. Waited. Simone arrived at 7:15. 2 folders, a thermos, the focused energy of someone awake since 4:30 who has made peace with it. She stopped when she saw the lobby complete for the first time. She stood in front of the photograph. He was here before you, she said. Still recalibrating, she looked a moment longer, then opened her folder. The morning's agenda, annotated, priorities flagged. Dorothy confirmed she'll be here by 8:45, wants to be in the room before the others arrive. Of course she does. Prism Tech sending 2 engineers for the afternoon technical orientation. Mayor's office called again about expansion to 2 other neighborhoods. Tell them March, after the first cohort completes a full cycle. Already did. She closed the folder. He looked around the lobby, the light, the welcome area, his father on the wall. Yes, he said. First cohort arrived at 9. 23 students, ranging from 17 to 62, from communities across Atlanta and beyond. They came through the front door. All of them, because there was only one. Marcus stood to the side and watched their faces as they entered. There was something in the expression of a person walking into a space built for them, not decorated for them as an afterthought, but designed from the beginning with them in mind. He'd been trying to produce that expression for years. He recognized it now. A woman named Dorothy stopped in front of the photograph. 62 years old, retired postal worker, front row of the Cybersecurity Fundamentals program. 3 pre-orientation emails to Simone already sent. Stood there a long time, then turned to the nearby volunteer guide. Who is this man? James Webb. Electrician. He worked in this building for 7 years. The center is named for him. Dorothy looked at the photograph. The toolbox, the uniform, the expression of complete presence. "He looks like my brother," she said. Then she turned and walked into the building. Marcus was 15 feet away. He heard every word. He looked at the floor for a moment, his father's face. Father's particular dignity, his father's way of being entirely present in whatever space he occupied, visible if you looked, invisible if you didn't bother. "Looks like my brother." She had seen him, without context, without the dedication plaque being installed next week, without knowing anything about who James Webb was. She had looked at a photograph of a man with a toolbox and had recognized something and had said it out loud. Marcus raised his eyes, looked at his father's photograph, then turned back. 22 more people were still coming through the front door, and there was work to do. By mid-afternoon, the building had found its rhythm. Classrooms running, voices coming through open doors, the specific back and forth of people learning something they weren't sure they could learn and discovering they could. Dorothy in the front row, pen moving. The instructor had messaged Simone, going to be either my best student or my most challenging one, currently betting both. Upper floors alive with startup founders arranging equipment, running first planning sessions, doing what people do when they've been given resources they'd been told weren't available to them. One founder, Priya, 26, had spent 2 years trying to get funding through traditional channels for an AI-assisted accessibility product. She'd been told repeatedly that the market was unclear, a sentence that meant something particular when the product was designed for users who didn't look like the people doing the funding. Her product worked. Marcus had reviewed the specifications himself. He moved through the floors without announcing himself, stopped in doorways, listened, the way his father used to move through buildings, not claiming the space, just attending to it, making sure the lights were on where they needed to be. 3, he found Simone at the third-floor window, thermos in one hand, tablet in the other, reading with the focused attention of someone who has learned to absorb information in whatever sliver of time is available. Priya's first mentor session, Simone said without looking up. The web technologies engineer assigned to her says she's the most technically precise founder he's worked with in 5 years. Dorothy has asked 6 questions total. Instructor has revised his assessment from challenging to extraordinary. She closed the tablet. My mother is in the 3rd row. She hasn't taken a note. She's just listening. Marcus looked out the window at Peachtree Street below. Mid-afternoon density of the city. People moving between things in the long light. "The Hale case," he said. Helena called. "Prosecution has enough to go to trial without a plea. Hale's attorney is recommending he take the deal, probably this week." Marcus nodded. He'd never had satisfaction in this part. Victor Hale's consequences were appropriate and also sad in the way that deliberate dishonesty is always sad, not for the person who chose it, but for the waste. The distance between who someone could have been and who they turned out to be when they believed no one was positioned to see clearly. "Gerald called last week," Simone said. "I know. Claudette relayed it. What did you tell him? That his expertise doesn't align with our current initiatives." Pause. "He'll find something. He's not without capability. He just need to see something clearly before he could use it." "Saw it. Counts." She looked at him. "You're more patient than most people understand. My father was patient. I inherited it imperfectly." Below, a group of teenagers from the high school partnership were crossing toward the building. 14, 15 years old, in the formation of young people, trying not to look nervous about going somewhere new, scattered. Slightly too casual. The group coherence of people who don't want arriving to look like it means something even though it does. They reached the front door, walked in. The welcome area received them the way it had been designed to, not warmly as performance, but attentively as practice. 2 people whose entire job was to make whoever came through the door feel expected. The teenager's posture changed. Small shift. The shift happens when a body receives information. This place was built with you in mind. Simone picked up her folders. 3 things before 4 o'clock. Go, she went. Marcus stayed at the window a moment longer, then went down to the lobby. Stood in front of his father's photograph. James Webb, 1941 to 2009. Electrician, father. The name above the door of a building on Peachtree Street where the front entrance was the only entrance. Where Dorothy had said he looks like my brother and meant it as the full recognition it was. "I see you, Ba," Marcus said. He stood there a moment, then crossed the lobby, the warm wood floor, the natural light, the welcome area still active with a stop asking a question and getting a genuine answer, and walked to the front door. Pushed through it, stepped onto Peachtree Street, Atlanta in late afternoon, light going golden, traffic moving, the enormous, ordinary business of a city that doesn't stop for anything. He stood on the sidewalk where a side entrance used to direct certain people around to a different door, bricked over during renovation. No discussion required. One door now, front door. He turned north and walked to where Daniel waited at the corner. Sat back. He thought about Renata's letter, about Dorothy and the photograph. About 23 people who had come through a front door this morning because it was the only kind this building had. He took out his phone, found Eleanor Vance in his contacts. She answered on the second ring. "Marcus, I heard the center opened today." "How'd it go?" He thought about Dorothy saying he looks like my brother, about his father on the wall of a building his father had entered through a side entrance for 7 years. A front door that was the only door. "Exactly right," he said. "That's exactly what it should do." A pause. Eleanor, who was not sentimental but was honest. "Good. Eleanor, I need to talk to you about Washington." "I know." A pause. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." The Bentley moved north through Atlanta evening. The city falling into its spring dusk, lights coming on across the skyline, in offices and lobbies and corridors and rooms across the city, all the rooms lit by people who had spent their working lives making sure the lights worked, whose names were not above any door, whose faces were not on any wall, not yet. That was the work still ahead. And Marcus Webb, who had learned patience from his father and precision from necessity and purpose from 40 years of carrying a question he'd finally found a way to answer, looked out at the lit city and was already thinking about what came next.